They thought I couldn't understand French. Maybe we should wait 6 months before taking the house. The sentence drifted across the dinner table as casually as if they were discussing tomorrow's weather. I froze. My fork stopped halfway to my mouth. Across from me, my future mother-in-law lifted her wineglass with an elegant smile. Beside her, my future father-in-law nodded in agreement. The man sitting next to me, the man I was supposed to marry in exactly 3 days, didn't look surprised. 6 months is much safer, his father replied in French. If she realizes what's happening too early, everything becomes complicated. For a moment, I honestly wondered if I'd misunderstood. Then his mother laughed softly. She's older than Daniel anyway. By the time she figures it out, it won't matter. The restaurant suddenly felt 10 degrees colder. Soft jazz continued playing in the background. Waiters moved quietly between candlelit tables. Couples celebrated anniversaries. Friends laughed over dessert. To everyone else, it looked like an ordinary family dinner. To me, it had just become the moment my entire future collapsed. Because they believed I couldn't understand a single word. They thought the American Army officer sitting across from them was smiling politely while they discussed travel plans. Instead, I was listening as they calmly planned how to use me, how to marry me, how long to stay married, and when to walk away. My name is Sarah Whitmore. At the time, I was 42 years old, a lieutenant colonel in the United States Army. I'd spent more than 20 years in uniform, 2 overseas deployments, hundreds of soldiers under my command, more military funerals than I care to remember. People often imagine military life as explosions, helicopters, and action movies. The reality is much quieter. It's waking before sunrise, missing birthdays, missing Christmas mornings, learning to smile through exhaustion because the people depending on you deserve your best. After 20 years, I had accepted something. Marriage simply might not happen for me. Not because I didn't want it. Life had just taken me somewhere else. Then, I met Daniel Hart. We met at a charity fundraiser supporting veterans transitioning into civilian careers. Most people wanted to hear combat stories. Daniel didn't. Instead, he asked what I liked to read. We spent nearly 2 hours talking about history, architecture, travel, and our favorite authors. Not once did he ask how many deployments I'd completed. Not once did he call me a hero. For the first time in years, someone looked at me and saw a woman before he saw a soldier. That mattered more than I realized. Our relationship grew slowly. No games. No drama. No whirlwind romance. Just 2 adults who seemed ready for the next chapter of life. At least, that's what I believed. When he proposed, I didn't hesitate. For the first time in years, I allowed myself to imagine retirement with someone beside me. A home, quiet mornings, weekend road trips, growing old together. Dreams I hadn't dared imagine before. 3 months before the wedding, I submitted my leave request through Army headquarters. When the approval email arrived, I smiled for the rest of the day. After years of missing family weddings because duty always came first, I'd finally be present for my own. That evening Daniel took me to dinner. We laughed about seating charts, argued playfully over honeymoon destinations, talked about where we'd spend Christmas. Everything felt perfectly normal. Until he casually mentioned, "My parents land Tuesday." I smiled. I'm excited to finally meet them. They're excited too. His answer sounded genuine. Still, something inside me felt strangely uneasy. I couldn't explain why. Every video call we'd shared over the previous year had been polite. His mother always smiled. His father always asked thoughtful questions. Yet every conversation somehow left me feeling observed. His father seemed unusually interested in my retirement timeline, my pension, my military benefits. At the time, I convinced myself it was simple curiosity. Now, I wish I'd trusted my instincts. 3 days before the wedding, their flight arrived from France. I met them at Washington Dulles International Airport. His mother greeted me with 2 air kisses. His father offered a firm handshake. Both were impeccably dressed. Elegant. Sophisticated. The kind of people who carried themselves as though every room belonged to them. His mother smiled. "So, you really do look exactly like Daniel described." I laughed politely. "I hope that's a compliment." "Oh, it is." She smiled again. But somehow, her eyes never did. That evening, Daniel reserved a private table overlooking the Potomac River. Soft candlelight reflected across the water. The restaurant specialized in French cuisine, which suddenly seemed strangely appropriate. For the first hour, everything felt pleasant. We discussed travel, family traditions, wedding plans, future vacations. Every now and then, his parents slipped into French. I didn't think much of it. Lots of bilingual families naturally switch languages. What bothered me was what happened afterward. Every single time they finished speaking, they looked directly at me. Sometimes they smiled. Sometimes they didn't. Daniel never translated. Not once. Finally, I asked lightly, "So, what am I missing?" His mother waved her hand dismissively. "Oh, nothing important." Then she immediately changed the subject. Something about that answer stayed with me. Years in military intelligence had taught me something simple. People rarely hide information that doesn't matter. There was one detail nobody at that table knew. Not Daniel. Not his parents. Nobody. Years earlier, during a NATO assignment in Europe, I'd spent nearly 3 years working alongside French officers. By the time I returned to the United States, I spoke French fluently. Not perfectly, but fluently enough to understand normal conversation without difficulty. I'd simply never mentioned it. Why would I? Until tonight. It had never mattered. Then dessert arrived. The conversation shifted back into French. At first, the comments sounded harmless. Then they became personal. Then uncomfortable. Then deeply disturbing. Finally, Daniel's father leaned forward and quietly said something that made my blood run cold. "After the wedding, the house becomes the priority." I kept smiling, kept nodding politely, kept acting as though I understood nothing. Because after 20 years in the army, I'd learned one lesson better than almost anyone. When people believe you aren't listening, they usually tell you everything you need to know. And I had a feeling. The worst part of the conversation hadn't even started yet. The conversation they never expected me to understand. I kept smiling, kept sipping my coffee, kept pretending I hadn't understood a single word. Inside, every sentence was cutting deeper than the last. Daniel's father leaned back in his chair. The house should be transferred as soon as possible. His mother nodded. Not immediately. That would look suspicious. She glanced toward me before lowering her voice. "Wait 6 months. By then she'll trust you completely." Daniel took another sip of wine. "I've already started preparing." His mother smiled proudly. "Good. And the retirement money?" Daniel shrugged. "We'll deal with that after the wedding." I felt my heartbeat quicken. Retirement money? The house? They weren't talking about building a future together. They were dividing one that didn't belong to them. His father lowered his voice even further. "And Sophie?" Daniel smiled. "She's still in Paris. She understands." His mother laughed softly. "That poor woman. She really believes she's found true love." Daniel didn't answer. He didn't need to. His silence confirmed everything. I suddenly understood why our engagement had moved so quickly. Why he'd insisted on combining finances after the honeymoon. Why he'd become unusually interested in my military pension. Why he kept asking about survivor benefits and retirement timelines. Questions I'd once mistaken for curiosity now sounded like financial planning. Not for our future. For his. The waiter cleared our dinner plates. Fresh coffee arrived. No one noticed I hadn't touched dessert. Daniel's mother spoke again. When the divorce happens, make sure she thinks it was her idea. His father nodded approvingly. People fight less when they believe they're making the decision themselves. The three of them chuckled quietly. I looked down at my coffee cup. 22 years in the army had taught me how to stay calm under pressure. Combat teaches you something valuable. Emotion can wait. Observation comes first. So I listened. Every word. Every detail. Every lie. Then Daniel asked the question that finally erased every remaining doubt. What if she finds out before the wedding? His mother smiled confidently. She won't. His father added. She doesn't speak French. For the first time that evening, I almost laughed. I slowly placed my coffee cup onto the table. The soft clink against the saucer immediately drew everyone's attention. I looked first at Daniel, then at his parents. Finally, in calm, fluent French, I said, "Actually, I've understood every word you've said since the appetizers." Silence. Absolute silence. Daniel stared at me as though I'd become someone else. His mother's face drained of color. His father blinked several times. No one moved. Even the waiter approaching our table hesitated before quietly walking away. I continued in French. The house. My retirement. The 6-month plan. And Sophie in Paris. Did I miss anything? Daniel nearly dropped his wine glass. You speak French? I smiled politely. For almost 15 years. No one at the table seemed capable of speaking. Finally, his mother recovered first. This is a misunderstanding. I shook my head gently. No, it was a conversation. The misunderstanding was believing I couldn't understand it. Daniel reached toward my hand. Sarah, please let me explain. I calmly moved my hand away. I've been listening for nearly an hour. I think you've explained quite enough. His father leaned forward. You're overreacting. I looked directly into his eyes. Am I? You discussed transferring my home, my military pension, my retirement, my divorce, and another woman. I paused. All during dinner. The older man had no answer. Daniel stood abruptly. Let's leave. No. I remained seated. I like it here. His voice became desperate. We shouldn't do this in public. I smiled. Interesting. You didn't seem concerned about privacy when you were planning my future. Several nearby diners glanced toward our table. No one could hear the French conversation. But everyone recognized tension when they saw it. Daniel lowered his voice. I love you. For a brief second. Those words almost hurt more than everything else. Because I'd believed them. Completely. Then I quietly asked, does Sophie know you love her too? His face went completely blank. That answer told me everything. I stood, picked up my purse, placed my engagement ring carefully on the table beside his untouched dessert. No dramatic speech. No shouting. No tears. Just one sentence. Also in French. You should have worried less about whether I understood your language, and more about whether you deserved my trust. I turned and walked toward the restaurant entrance. Behind me, no one called my name. No one followed. Not immediately. As I reached the valet stand, my phone vibrated. The screen displayed an unfamiliar international number. Country code. France. I answered cautiously. Hello. A young woman spoke in hesitant English. Are you Sarah? Yes. There was a long pause. Then she quietly said something that made my entire body go still. My name is Sophie. And I think we've both been lied to. The woman calling from Paris. I tightened my grip on the phone. Cars rolled past the restaurant entrance. The valet handed keys to another customer. Somewhere behind me, Daniel was still inside trying to explain himself to his parents. None of it mattered anymore. I focused on the voice coming through the phone. My name is Sophie. She hesitated. I think we've both been lied to. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Finally, I asked, "How did you get my number?" I found it in Daniel's email. That answer alone told me more than I wanted to know. You have access to his email? Not anymore. Her voice sounded exhausted. But I used to. A cold feeling settled in my stomach. She continued quietly. I thought Daniel and I were getting married. I closed my eyes. The irony was almost unbearable. Two women. Two different countries. One identical promise. When was your wedding supposed to be? I asked. Next spring. She laughed bitterly. At least. That's what he told me. I leaned against a stone column outside the restaurant. He proposed to me 8 months ago. Silence. Then I heard Sophie quietly whisper, "Oh my God." Neither of us had expected to become the other woman's phone call. Yet here we were. Strangers connected by the same lie. Sophie took a slow breath. I wasn't looking for proof. I was looking for travel information. She explained that Daniel had accidentally left his email account open on her laptop after visiting Paris several weeks earlier. She hadn't intended to search through his messages until one subject line caught her attention. Wedding venue confirmation, Washington, D.C. She thought it had to be a mistake. Instead, she found photographs, invoices, guest lists, my name, our engagement pictures. Everything. I thought maybe you were a relative. She laughed sadly. I kept hoping there was another explanation. There wasn't. I looked back through the restaurant window. Daniel had finally realized I wasn't coming back. He stood near the entrance searching the parking lot. His mother spoke rapidly beside him. His father looked furious. Good. For once. They weren't controlling the situation. Sophie interrupted my thoughts. There's something else you should know. I'm listening. He asked me for money. That surprised me. What kind of money? An investment. She sighed. He said he wanted to buy property in America. My heartbeat quickened. Property. The same word his parents kept repeating over dinner. How much? Almost 100,000 euros. Did you give it to him? No. I wanted paperwork first. I smiled faintly. Military training teaches patience. Apparently. French accountants do too. Over the next hour, Sophie forwarded everything she had. Emails, flight confirmations, bank requests, photographs, voice messages. One document immediately caught my attention. It wasn't written in French. It was written in English. A draft prenuptial agreement. Except, I'd never seen it before. The document listed assets that weren't even mine. It also included a signature. My signature. Or at least, someone's attempt to copy it. I stared at the page. The forgery wasn't terrible. But it wasn't good enough. Not for someone who signed military documents almost every day. The differences were obvious. The angle. The pressure. Even the spacing between letters. Someone had practiced my signature. Poorly. I called my longtime friend and military attorney, Colonel Rebecca Hayes. After listening for nearly 20 minutes, she interrupted me. Sarah, I need you to stop talking. Why? Because this just became criminal. The words settled heavily between us. Forgery. Attempted financial fraud. And, depending on intent, potential conspiracy. I looked toward the restaurant again. Daniel had no idea his evening had already changed forever. Rebecca continued. Save every email. Every message. Every attachment. Don't confront him again. Let the evidence speak. I smiled. That sounded exactly like something an army lawyer would say. The next morning, Daniel arrived outside my townhouse carrying flowers. Red roses. My favorite. Normally, that would have meant something. Today, they looked like props. He knocked 3 times. I opened the door but remained inside. Sarah, please. I can explain. I folded my arms. Go ahead. He looked genuinely uncomfortable. My parents misunderstood. They misunderstood? They're old-fashioned. I nodded slowly. So, they imagined Sophie? His face immediately lost color. For the first time, he realized I knew her name. He hadn't told me, which meant only one thing. Someone else had. He tried again. She's just a business contact. I almost laughed. Business contacts usually don't plan weddings. His mouth opened, then closed again. No answer. I quietly held up my phone. I spoke with her for almost 2 hours. He froze. She sent me everything. Still. Silence. Emails. Photos. Bank requests. Travel itineraries. There wasn't much left to deny. A week later, federal investigators requested copies of every document. Not because of the affair. Affairs aren't crimes. Forged financial documents are. So are false legal declarations. Rebecca handled everything. I answered questions, provided records, then quietly returned to work. Military life teaches something important. The mission continues, even when your personal life falls apart. Meanwhile, Daniel stopped calling, stopped texting, stopped pretending there was an explanation. Because deep down, he finally understood something. The biggest mistake he'd made wasn't cheating. It wasn't lying. It wasn't involving his parents. His biggest mistake was believing a woman who had spent 22 years protecting classified military operations would somehow fail to recognize deception in her own life. And soon, a courtroom would decide just how expensive that mistake would become. The wedding that never happened. 3 weeks later, the wedding venue stood exactly as it had the day we booked it. White roses lined the entrance. Crystal chandeliers illuminated the ballroom. Soft piano music drifted through the empty reception hall. Everything was ready. Except, there would be no wedding. Instead of guests carrying gifts, the room filled with attorneys, investigators, venue managers, and representatives from the bank handling several financial transactions connected to Daniel's accounts. I arrived wearing a navy blue business suit, not a wedding dress. After 22 years in the Army, I'd learned something simple. You don't wear the wrong uniform into a battle. Daniel arrived 15 minutes later. The moment he saw me, he stopped walking. His face turned pale. What is this? His voice echoed through the nearly empty ballroom. He looked toward his parents. Neither of them answered. They looked just as confused. Then he noticed 2 federal investigators standing near the stage. One stepped forward. Mr. Hart, we'd like to ask you a few questions. Daniel looked back at me. What did you do? I answered calmly. I told the truth. Nothing more. Nothing less. The investigators escorted everyone into one of the conference rooms attached to the venue. Folders covered the table. Emails. Financial records. International wire requests. Copies of forged documents. Rebecca Hayes quietly organized each file while Daniel's attorney reviewed the evidence. One investigator opened a folder. Mr. Hart, did you prepare this prenuptial agreement? Daniel hesitated. No. Did you authorize anyone else to prepare it? No. The investigator slid another page across the table. A forensic handwriting report. Your Honor, one attorney said, this report concludes the signature attributed to Colonel Whitmore was not authentic. Another document followed. Bank communications. Then travel records. Then emails exchanged between Daniel and Sophie. Each new page removed another possible excuse. The room grew quieter with every minute. Finally, the lead investigator placed one final document on the table. A series of text messages. Daniel stared at them without speaking. His attorney slowly lowered the papers. One message read, "After the wedding, transferring the property will be much easier." Another, "Don't worry. She trusts me completely." There was nowhere left to hide. No misunderstanding. No translation error. No innocent explanation. Only evidence. Daniel's father finally stood. "This has gone too far." Rebecca looked directly at him. "No. It went too far when your family discussed fraud over dinner while believing my client couldn't understand French." Silence. His mother lowered her head. For the first time since arriving in America, she had absolutely nothing to say. Over the following months, the legal investigation continued. Several financial transactions were canceled before any money changed hands. The forged agreement was officially declared invalid. The attempted property transfers never moved forward. As for Daniel, his professional reputation collapsed almost overnight. Clients withdrew contracts. Business partners quietly walked away. Not because of the failed relationship. Because trust, once broken publicly, is difficult to rebuild. One afternoon, nearly 6 months after everything ended, my phone rang. It was Sophie. This time, her voice sounded lighter. "I wanted to thank you." "For what?" "You told me the truth before I built my entire life around a lie." She laughed softly. "I've started over." "So have I." We talked for almost an hour. 2 women. 2 different countries. One shared lesson. Never ignore the first moment your instincts whisper that something isn't right. A year later, I stood on the balcony of a leadership conference overlooking the Potomac River. Young officers filled the auditorium below. Some were beginning their careers. Others were preparing for their first command assignments. One captain approached me after my presentation. "Colonel Whitmore, I wanted to ask you something." "Of course." "How do you know when to walk away from someone you love?" I thought about Daniel, about that French restaurant, about Sophie, about the wedding that never happened. Then I answered, "You don't leave because someone made one mistake. You leave when they build an entire future that depends on your silence." She nodded slowly. "I think I understand. I hope you never have to." That evening, I drove home with the windows down. The summer air carried the scent of freshly cut grass. For the first time in years, my future belonged entirely to me. No hidden plans. No secret conversations. No pretending. Only peace. Sometimes people ask if I regret learning French. I always smile. Because the language itself never changed my life. It simply revealed the truth that had been hiding in plain sight. The greatest lesson wasn't about betrayal, or fraud, or a wedding that never happened. It was this. The strongest people aren't the ones who never get deceived. They're the ones who refuse to stay after the deception is exposed. Real love is built on honesty. Real respect doesn't disappear when no one is watching. And the right person never needs you to understand less, so they can take more. Sometimes the greatest victory isn't walking down the aisle. It's having the courage to walk away before you do.